The story of Baldwin IV does not begin with a throne. It begins with a whisper, the whisper of a secret that should have ended his life before it ever truly began. But this is not a tale of misery or pity. It is the story of a boy who should have been forgotten by history, a boy who achieved the impossible not just once, and became one of the most astonishing leaders the medieval world ever produced. What you are about to hear is not legend, not myth, not exaggeration. It is the impossible truth of a king who defied his own body, defied the limits of his age, defied his enemies, and defied the greatest military mind of the 12th century. Baldwin was born in Jerusalem on the 16th of July, 1161, heir to one of the most fragile kingdoms on earth. The kingdom of Jerusalem was young, surrounded, and permanently outnumbered. Every child of nobility was raised knowing that war was not a possibility, but a certainty. Baldwin grew up in a court of tension and vigilance. He was curious, sharp-tongued, observant, not physically imposing, but mentally relentless. He was competitive, stubborn, and refused to accept limits placed on him by others. He rode horses through the courtyards, sparred with wooden swords, pushed himself beyond what was expected of a prince, until one afternoon, during a lesson, everything changed. Two boys wrestling in a sunlit courtyard, laughter, the clash of youth against youth, and then fingernails raking down an arm, deep enough to tear skin, deep enough to draw blood. The other boy cried out. Baldwin did not. He looked down at the wound, saw the blood welling up, felt nothing. His tutor saw it happen, saw the blood, saw the boy's face, curious, confused, but not in pain. And in that moment, watching a child examine his own torn flesh with the detachment of a scholar studying a manuscript, the tutor understood. The tests came quickly, needles pressed into skin, flames held close to fingertips, ice, heat, pressure. Baldwin felt none of it. He watched the physicians work with the curiosity of a boy observing something happening to someone else. When they pressed a heated iron near his hand, he did not flinch. When they pricked his fingers with needles, he did not react. He simply watched as if his own body had become a foreign country. The physicians exchanged glances, the kind of glances that adults think children do not understand. Baldwin understood. The word was not spoken aloud at first, but everyone in that room knew what they were witnessing. Leprosy. In the 12th century, this was not a diagnosis, it was a death sentence. The disease would take his nerves first, then his hands, then his feet, then his face. It would hollow him out from the inside, stealing sensation before it stole flesh, so that he would not even feel himself being devoured. Most children, learning such a fate, would have collapsed into despair.
Baldwin asked when he could resume training.
This is the first thing you must understand about the boy who would become the leper king. He was not brave because he did not understand what was happening to him. He was brave because he understood completely and chose defiance anyway. He was 11 years old. He trained harder after the diagnosis, pushed his body longer, studied deeper into the night. When tutors suggested rest, he refused. When physicians recommended withdrawal from public life, he ignored them, because Baldwin had understood something that the adults around him had not yet grasped. If he was going to die, and he was going to die, then the only question that mattered was what he would do with the time between now and then. He chose to become a king, not a figurehead, not a symbol, a king. The boy who could not feel pain would spend his short life forcing his enemies to redefine what is possible. To understand Baldwin, you must understand the world that formed him. The kingdom of Jerusalem in the mid-12th century was an anomaly, a Christian kingdom carved into hostile territory, religious fervour, and constant military readiness. It was a miracle held together by will and desperation. It existed as a Christian island in a Muslim sea. Its borders were measured not in miles, but in the distance a man could ride before the enemy caught him. Its population was outnumbered. Its resources were limited. Its survival, on paper, was impossible, and yet it endured. It endured because its people understood that showing weakness meant death. That hesitation invited destruction, that the only way to survive when surrounded by enemies was to make those enemies believe that attacking you would cost more than it was worth. This was the kingdom Baldwin was raised to rule. To the south and east rose the power of Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known to history as Saladin. By the early 1170s, Saladin had unified Egypt and Syria, something no Muslim leader had accomplished in decades. For the first time since the First Crusade, the Christian states faced a single, coordinated enemy. Saladin was not merely a warrior, he was patient, calculating, and methodical. He believed in exhausting his enemies rather than crushing them outright. Against him stood a kingdom ruled by a child. His father, King Amaric I, was a capable warrior and a shrewd diplomat. He taught Baldwin that Jerusalem's survival depended not on winning wars, but on making wars too expensive for enemies to pursue. Strike fast, hit hard, retreat before you can be encircled. Make every battle cost the enemy more than they planned to spend. Baldwin learned. He studied maps until he could close his eyes and see every road, every river crossing, every choke point where a smaller force could hold a larger one. He memorized supply routes and water sources. He learned which nobles could be trusted in battle and which would break. He absorbed everything. And then, on the 11th of July, 1174, his father died. Baldwin was 13 years old. He was crowned King of Jerusalem in a ceremony that must have felt like a funeral for his childhood. The crown was placed on the head of a boy who already knew that his body was dying. The scepter was pressed into hands that were already beginning to lose sensation. Many expected the regents to rule in his name. Many assumed the boy king would be a puppet, trotted out for ceremonies, while real men made real decisions. They were wrong. Baldwin understood something critical very early. Jerusalem could not survive on defense alone. It could not hide behind walls and pray for mercy. If the kingdom was to survive, it needed to project strength, even when it had none. By the year 1176, Baldwin's condition could no longer be hidden. His right hand had begun to stiffen. His fingers lost dexterity. Pain was replaced by numbness, and numbness by decay. And yet, this was the year Baldwin truly became king. Baldwin involved himself in every aspect of governance. He attended councils, he questioned commanders, he demanded explanations, challenged assumptions, refused to accept decisions made without his input. The nobles learned quickly this child would not be managed. He could not swing a sword with the strength of a grown man. He could not ride as long or fight as hard. But he could think. He could plan. He could see patterns that others missed. And he could lead. Within 2 years of taking the throne, Baldwin had established himself as the true ruler of Jerusalem. Not through force, his body was already failing him for that, but through the sheer relentless pressure of his presence. He made himself unavoidable. He made himself essential. By the late 1170s, Baldwin could no longer feel his hands. He sometimes could not mount a horse without assistance, yet he still rode. Because he knew something his enemies did not. Morale was a weapon, and a king who rode into battle despite his condition inspired loyalty that no gold could buy. Saladin was watching. The boy king was not collapsing as expected. He was adapting through sheer strength of will alone. And across the desert, in the courts of Egypt and Syria, a man named Saladin was watching. Soon they would meet. Saladin, even the name carried weight. By the middle of the 1170s, Saladin had accomplished what no Muslim leader had managed in nearly a century. He had unified Egypt and Syria under a single command. He had ended the fractured chaos that had allowed the Crusader states to survive. He had created for the first time since the First Crusade, a coordinated military force capable of crushing the Christian kingdoms. He was not a berserker, he was not a brute, he was patient. Saladin understood that the Crusader states could not be defeated in a single battle. Their heavy cavalry was too powerful, their fortifications too strong, their desperation too fierce. A direct assault would break against them like waves against a cliff. So he chose a different strategy. Exhaust them, raid their farmlands, burn their crops, intercept their caravans, cut their supply lines, force them to march and countermarch until their horses went lame and their soldiers collapsed from heat and thirst. Make them spend men and money defending every border, every road, every village. And then, when they were stretched thin and desperate, when their alliances had frayed and their coffers had emptied, then strike. It was a strategy of patience, of slow strangulation, of inevitable victory. And standing against this strategy was a 16-year-old boy whose own body was waging the same war of attrition against him. Baldwin knew what Saladin was doing. He could see the pattern. Raid here, probe there, never committing to a decisive engagement, always testing, always measuring. A lesser king might have waited behind walls and prayed. Baldwin chose to hunt. November 1177. Saladin believed he had found his opportunity. Baldwin was just 16 years old. His condition was known. Baldwin's forces were scattered. The kingdom's best knights were campaigning in the north. The south lay open, defended by skeleton garrisons and exhausted levies. Saladin struck. Saladin marched north from Egypt with an army estimated by modern historians to be between 20,000 and 26,000 men, including cavalry, infantry, siege engineers. Supply trains stretching to the horizon. This was not a raid, this was annihilation. His target was Jerusalem itself, not to siege it, not yet, but to demonstrate that the Christian kingdom could not protect its own heart, to humiliate, to terrify, to show the world that the boy king was helpless. Baldwin had almost no time to respond. He had perhaps 375 knights with him. A few thousand infantry, many poorly armed, against Saladin's host. This was not a battle, it was accepted suicide. His advisors urged caution, wait for reinforcements, let Saladin tire himself, loot in the countryside, avoid battle at all costs. Baldwin listened.
Then he called for his horse.
Baldwin understood something Saladin did not. The young king could barely mount without assistance. His hands had begun to curl inward, the muscles atrophying as the nerves died. He needed help fitting his fingers around the reins. His grip was failing him. He required assistance simply to remain upright in the saddle. But his mind was clear. He led the army himself. Earlier that month, Saladin entered the kingdom while many Frankish forces were away in the north, leaving the south vulnerable. Baldwin moved to defend Ascalon, trying to block Saladin's path, but he was pinned and contained there by detachments sent to keep the king trapped. Saladin, believing the young king neutralized, pushed deeper into the kingdom, looting and foraging, letting discipline loosen because victory felt inevitable. This is the fatal error. Baldwin broke out. He linked with reinforcements, including a small but critical force of Templars, and moved fast along the coast to catch Saladin's army before it could concentrate. Before Baldwin gave the order to march, he made one final decision. The true cross, it rested in Jerusalem, a fragment of wood believed to be from the cross on which Christ was crucified. The spiritual heart of the kingdom, its most sacred possession. To carry it into battle was an immense risk. If it fell, morale would shatter. If it was captured, the psychological wound might never heal. Most kings kept it safe behind walls, brought out only for ceremonies.
Baldwin ordered it brought to him.
This was not superstition, it was command. He understood his men. They were exhausted, terrified. Facing an army that outnumbered them more than 50 to 1, they needed something to hold on to when every instinct screamed at them to run. The cross arrived, the army gathered around it in silence. Chroniclers describe knights dismounting, removing helmets, kneeling in the dust, hands reaching out to touch the reliquary, not because they believed it would save them, but because they believed that dying in its presence meant something. Baldwin watched. This was the moment. This was where desperation became defiance. He could have given a speech. He could have invoked God, duty, honour, glory. Instead, he simply mounted his horse, turned toward the enemy and began to ride. The army followed. At Montgisard, near Ramla, Baldwin did not hesitate, he struck. The Frankish cavalry formed tight, knee to knee, lances levelled. They did not try to engage the whole army. They could not. Instead, they aimed for the centre, for Saladin's command group, for the heart of the beast, and they charged. The ground shook. 375 knights, armoured in steel, mounted on war horses, bred for exactly this moment, moving as a single mass of metal and fury. The earth trembled beneath them, the thunder of hooves drowned out every other sound. The impact was catastrophic. Saladin's dispersed forces had no time to form. The heavy Frankish cavalry, the most devastating shock weapon in medieval warfare, smashed into unprepared units like a hammer into glass. Men went down, horses screamed, command structures disintegrated. The first line of Saladin's army simply ceased to exist. Baldwin's knights did not stop. They pressed the attack, driving deeper, refusing to let the enemy reform. Where Saladin's men tried to rally, the Franks hit them again. And again. And again. This is what Frankish heavy cavalry could do when it hit an unprepared enemy. This is why Saladin had spent years trying to avoid exactly this moment. This is what happened when you gave a desperate army a reason to believe and a target to destroy. Saladin barely escaped with his life. His army did not escape at all. The retreat became a rout. The rout became a slaughter. Contemporary accounts describe the pursuit continuing for miles. Frankish cavalry hunting down fleeing men until their horses could no longer run. Saladin reached Egypt weeks later with only a fraction of his force still with him. His reputation for invincibility had been shattered by a teenage boy who could not feel his own hands on his sword. Montgisard should not have happened. The numbers were impossible. The tactical situation was suicidal. The commander was a child whose body was eating itself alive. But Baldwin had understood something fundamental about war. Battles are not won by the strongest army. They are won by the army that believes it can win. And on that day, against all reason, against all probability, Baldwin made his men believe. That is the victory of Montgisard, not just the defeat of Saladin's army, the proof that the impossible was possible. Montgisard did not end the war, but it changed everything. Saladin had been beaten, and Baldwin had proven that his presence on the battlefield was not symbolic, it was decisive. Baldwin paid for Montgisard physically because men like him are held together by routine, support and controlled effort. A forced march, a violent charge, the stress of command under existential stakes, the cold nights, the heat of the day, the infection risk, the strain of armour on damaged skin, all of it accelerates decline. Montgisard was glory for the kingdom, it was debt for Baldwin's body. By the year 1182, Saladin was no longer testing the kingdom of Jerusalem. He was actively searching for a decisive collapse. His strategy was clear. Avoid costly, uncertain battles against Frankish heavy cavalry. Instead, isolate, starve, and fracture the kingdom piece by piece. Belvoir Castle stood directly in his way. Belvoir was not merely a fortress, it was a keystone. Built by the Knights Hospitaller on a basalt plateau overlooking the Jordan Valley, Belvoir controlled the eastern approaches into the heart of the kingdom. If it fell, Saladin would gain a clear corridor for invasion, cutting Jerusalem off from the north and east. Now, there is something important most summaries skip, and it matters for the story. When people say Belvoir, they often mash together three different realities. First, Belvoir as a fortress, garrisoned and provisioned as a permanent gatehouse to the Jordan Valley. In peacetime, it could hold a few hundred fighting men and supporting staff, enough to survive isolation and raids. Castles and manor houses. Second, Saladin's major 1182 campaign, which produced a field battle near Belvoir that later writers often call the Battle of Belvoir Castle, or the Battle of Le Forblay. Third, the later full siege of Belvoir, which actually happened after Hattin, starting in late 1187 and lasting into early 1189. That is not what we are talking about here. What matters in Baldwin's lifetime is the 1182 campaign, because it shows what kind of war Baldwin was fighting. Not heroic charges every week, the long, grinding war of survival. Saladin advanced through the kingdom in the 1182 campaigning season. He hit roots, crops, villages and smaller positions, trying to turn the countryside into a weapon. He wanted to make the Franks either come out and die in the open or stay inside stone and starve while the kingdom around them burned. This is where the pressure built around Belvoir. Saladin surrounded the fortress in the summer of 1182, encircling it completely. Supply lines were cut, water sources were contested, siege engines were brought forward. That line is true in spirit because Belvoir was repeatedly pressured and isolated. But the key cinematic moment in the 1182 narrative is not a year-long siege, it is the field clash linked to Belvoir. On the 15th of July 1182, Saladin's army met a major crusader force in the area with Baldwin present. Later chroniclers and modern summaries give numbers that make it sound suicidal on paper, roughly 35,000 on Saladin's side, with 9,000 cavalry, against a crusader force listed as about 700 knights and around 9,000 infantry and Turcopoles. Those numbers are debated in historical discussion, and medieval totals often inflate, but the shape of the reality is not debated. Baldwin was facing an enemy who could replace men, and he could not. For weeks, Saladin pressed the siege, and for weeks the castle held. Baldwin knew what was at stake. Despite his deteriorating condition, despite increasing weakness in his limbs, Baldwin coordinated relief forces and harassment campaigns across Saladin's supply lines. He could not meet Saladin in open battle yet, but he did not need to. Saladin was forced to make a choice. Continue bleeding men against an unbreakable fortress, or withdraw. He withdrew. Belvoir Castle remained unconquered. Now, here is what happened in live terms, the part that makes this real. Baldwin's war in 1182 was a war of timing. He let Saladin move, then forced him to move on the wrong schedule. He forced Saladin to carry supplies farther than planned, to forage longer than planned, to guard routes longer than planned. He made Saladin spend time, and time in campaigning season is blood. That is how you fight a larger army when you cannot afford a single bad day. And Baldwin's body was the price tag. Every campaign meant travel on horseback, dust in the lungs, heat, infected skin under armour, sores that could not be felt, and injuries that did not warn him before they became dangerous. He was not simply ill. He was operating under conditions that were already brutal for healthy men, while his own body could not defend itself. Crucial ending beat, as we agreed. This defence should not have succeeded because the kingdom was outmatched in manpower, money and margin for error. It should not have succeeded because Baldwin's body was already failing fast. It should not have succeeded because any king trying to preserve his life would have avoided being the visible centre of resistance. But Baldwin's presence changed outcomes. He made commanders cooperate who otherwise would not. He made knights commit who otherwise would hesitate. He made the kingdom hold together under pressure that should have split it apart. And that is the part that matters for the viewer. This is not just a battle story, it is a story about a human being burning his own future to buy time for everyone else. Victory did not halt Baldwin's illness. If anything, it accelerated the stress of command, the hours in the saddle, armour pressing against skin that could not feel the damage being done, the cold nights, the infected wounds he did not notice until they festered. A healthy body might have recovered. Baldwin's body collected debts it could never repay. He sacrificed himself to save the people who depended on him. By the early 1180s, the transformation was impossible to hide. His hands had curled into claws. His feet had lost all sensation. Ulcers opened on his skin and would not heal. Infections came and went like tides, each one stealing something that would not return. This is what leprosy does. It does not kill quickly, it kills slowly, piece by piece, taking the things that make life bearable long before it takes life itself. First, it takes sensation. You cannot feel hot or cold. You cannot feel pressure or pain. You burn yourself and do not know it. You cut yourself and do not notice. Your body becomes a stranger that sends you no signals, no warnings, no information about its own destruction. Then it takes control. The nerves that tell your muscles what to do begin to fail. Your hands curl inward because the muscles that would straighten them no longer receive instructions. Your feet drag because you cannot feel where they are. Your face begins to change as the muscles beneath the skin lose their ability to hold it in place. Then it takes the flesh itself. Without sensation, injuries go unnoticed. Without treatment, they become infected. Without healing, they spread. The body consumes itself, slowly, relentlessly, while the mind remains trapped inside, fully aware of what is happening. This was Baldwin's reality every single day. Pain was no longer the enemy. Pain would have been a warning. Pain would have told him when to stop, when to rest, when his body had reached its limits. Baldwin felt nothing, so he did not stop. He continued to ride, though he needed to be strapped to the saddle. He continued to hold audiences, though attendants had to carry him to his throne. He continued to command, though his voice sometimes failed and scribes had to relay his orders. He made himself visible because visibility was survival. If his enemies believed him dying, they would attack. If his allies believed him fading, they would abandon him. If his nobles believed him weak, they would tear the kingdom apart, fighting over the succession. So Baldwin appeared, again and again, refusing to disappear into comfortable obscurity, refusing to let the kingdom forget that its king still lived, still ruled, still watched, and Saladin tested him. In 1182, Saladin launched a major campaign pressing deep into the kingdom, surrounding fortresses, burning crops, trying to force the Franks into a decisive battle on his terms. Baldwin refused to oblige. Instead, he waged a war of exhaustion, the same strategy Saladin had used against him. He harassed supply lines. He forced the enemy to guard routes they had not planned to guard. He made Saladin spend time, and time in campaigning season was blood. In 1183, Saladin struck at Kerak, the fortress of Reynold of Chatillon. The siege lasted from early November until the 4th of December. Baldwin's nobles quarrelled about how to respond. Factions paralysed action. So Baldwin went himself. He could not ride anymore. He could barely see. He was carried in a litter slung between horses, a dying man travelling to war because his presence was the only thing that could make his fractious nobles cooperate. Think about that for a moment. A man who could not walk, who could not see clearly, who had to be carried like cargo, travelling across hostile territory in winter, not because he could fight, not because he could command from the front, but because without him physically present, the men who were supposed to defend the kingdom would not stop arguing long enough to do it. Think about what that journey cost him. Every jolt of the litter, sending pain through joints that should not have been moving. Every hour adding to the exhaustion of a body that had nothing left to give. Every mile taking something that would never come back. And Baldwin made that journey knowing exactly what it would cost him, knowing it would shorten his life, knowing it would accelerate his decline, knowing that every day he spent on the road to Kerak was a day stolen from whatever time he had left. He went anyway, because the kingdom needed him there more than he needed to survive. That is what leadership meant to Baldwin. Not glory, not honor, not legacy, just this. The kingdom needed him, so he went, regardless of the cost. That is what Baldwin had become. The living symbol that held together a kingdom of competing egos and conflicting ambitions. When Baldwin's relief force appeared on the horizon, Saladin lifted the siege and withdrew. He had not been defeated in battle. He had been defeated by the presence of a man who should have been dead, who should have been bedridden, who should have been anything other than there on that field, still fighting, still commanding, still refusing to die. That is what Baldwin had become by 1183. Not a warrior king. He could no longer fight. Not a diplomat king. He could barely speak for hours at a time. He had become something rarer. A symbol that held a kingdom together through sheer refusal to abandon it. Maybe the only king in history to sacrifice himself to protect the weak and unrepresented. By 1184, Baldwin could no longer pretend. His hands were useless, his feet were gone, his eyes had begun to fail, attendants dressed him, fed him, carried him from room to room like a child. The disease that had announced itself with a scratch in a sunny courtyard had kept its promise. And still, Baldwin ruled. He understood that his death was coming. He also understood that his death would create a void, and voids in medieval politics were filled with blood. So he spent his final strength on the succession. He elevated his nephew, Baldwin V, as co-king in 1183, ensuring that the transition would not be contested. He appointed Raymond III of Tripoli as regent, not because Raymond was loved, but because Raymond was capable. He arranged marriages, settled disputes, bound rivals together with obligations they could not easily break. These were not the actions of a man clinging to power. They were the actions of a man preparing to let go. Baldwin's final months were measured in small agonies. The infections that returned no matter how carefully his wounds were tended. The fevers that left him delirious for days. The slow suffocation of a body that had forgotten how to function. He continued to hold audiences when he could, to make decisions, to arbitrate disputes between nobles who hated each other but feared civil war more. He could not write his own name anymore. He could not feed himself. He could not stand, sit unaided, or turn over in bed without help, but he could still think. And thinking for Baldwin was enough. This is not the story of a man refusing to let go out of pride. It is the story of a man defying all possibilities at every turn, sacrificing himself until his last breath. This is the part of his story that receives the least attention because it lacks the drama of cavalry charges and desperate battles. But in many ways, it is the most remarkable part of all. A man in Baldwin's condition, with Baldwin's power, could have done anything. He could have raged against his fate. He could have made reckless decisions to secure some final glory. He could have clung to authority until his last breath, refusing to prepare for what came after. Baldwin did none of these things. He governed with clarity. He planned with precision. He put the kingdom's survival above his own legacy. That requires a kind of courage that battles do not test. The courage to think beyond yourself, to work for a future you will never see, to spend your final strength not on monuments to your own name, but on foundations for others to build upon. Baldwin had that courage. Even as his body failed, his mind remained fixed on the kingdom's survival. Act 8. The Death of the Leper King. Baldwin IV died on the 16th of March, 1185. He was 23 years old. There was no final battle, no dramatic last stand, no speech for the chroniclers to record. There was only exhaustion. A body that had been running on will alone finally ran out. The chronicles do not describe his last moments. Perhaps there was nothing dramatic to describe. Perhaps he simply slipped away, as the dying do, between one breath and the next. What the chronicles do describe is what came after. Within 2 years, the fragile balance Baldwin had maintained collapsed. Rivalries he had suppressed exploded into faction. Decisions he would never have permitted were made by men who lacked his restraint. In 1187, at the Battle of Hattin, the army of Jerusalem was annihilated. The true cross, the same relic Baldwin had carried into battle at Montgisard, was captured and never recovered. Saladin conquered Jerusalem itself within months. Everything Baldwin had fought for, everything he had sacrificed his body to protect, everything he had spent his short life defending, gone. The kingdom Baldwin had held together with his failing body fell apart within 2 years of his death. It is tempting to say this was inevitable, that Baldwin had only delayed the unavoidable, that his suffering changed nothing in the end. Perhaps, but delay matters. Every year Baldwin bought was a year of lives lived, of children born, of pilgrims who travelled safely, of merchants who traded, of families who grew, of a kingdom that existed when it should not have existed at all. Baldwin did not save Jerusalem forever, no one could have, but he held it against his disease, against his enemies, against the limits of what should have been possible. He held it with a body that was betraying him, with hands that could not grip a sword, with eyes that could not see the men he commanded, with a voice that sometimes failed mid-sentence. He held it, and maybe he was the only person who could have. Baldwin IV is not remembered like other kings. He conquered no empires, he founded no dynasties, he did not live long enough to write his own legend. What he did was endure. He endured a disease that should have destroyed him before he reached the throne. He endured enemies who outnumbered him 10-1. He endured a body that could not feel its own destruction. He endured the loneliness of command in a kingdom that could not afford weakness. And he did it without self-pity, without complaint, without using his condition as an excuse for anything. Think about what that means. Think about the daily reality of being Baldwin. Waking up knowing that your body has less capacity today than it did yesterday, that tomorrow will be worse, that there is no recovery, no remission, no hope of returning to what you were, and getting up anyway, putting on armour you cannot feel, mounting a horse you cannot grip, riding into battles you cannot fight with your hands, but must fight with your presence, your voice, your refusal to be anywhere else. Think about the courage that requires, not the courage of a moment, the wild bravery of a charge, the desperate valour of a last stand. Those are easy compared to this. Baldwin's courage was the courage of repetition, of doing it again and again and again, day after day, year after year, while his body crumbled and his options narrowed and his death crept closer with every sunrise. That is the lesson of Baldwin IV. Not that willpower conquers all, it does not. Baldwin still died young, his kingdom still fell, but that the fight matters even when you know you cannot win. That showing up matters even when showing up costs you everything. That holding the line matters even when the line will eventually break, because someone has to hold it. Someone has to stand in the gap and refuse to move, not because they believe they cannot be moved, but because they believe the trying matters more than the outcome. Baldwin was that someone, a boy king, a dying child on a dying throne, who looked at the impossible and said, "Not yet, not while I breathe, not while I can be carried to the field, not while there is anything left of me to spend, and then spent it, all of it, everything he had, for a kingdom that would fall anyway, for a people who would be conquered anyway, for a cause that would be lost anyway, because the holding was the point. The holding was always the point. Baldwin IV understood that, and for 13 impossible years, against disease, against politics, against Saladin, against the limits of his own failing flesh, he held. That is his legacy. Not victory, not conquest, just this, he held. And sometimes that is enough, sometimes that is everything. Thank you for taking the time to remember a legend. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing for more.